Greetings, I'm Thomas Caldwell of the Aurelian Column, and this is the Book Report. Anniversaries can be somewhat difficult and traumatic, especially if you're a journalist and you were part of the coverage of that particular story. We've just recognized, I don't want to use the word celebrate, the 30th anniversary of the Tokyo subway gas attack. And that was when a religious group, if you can call them religious, unleashed poison gas on the Tokyo subway system at rush hour on the morning of March 20th, 1995, that resulted in the deaths of 14 people and more than 1,000 who were seriously injured, permanently in many cases. The book I'm talking about is The Cult at the End of the World. It was written by two journalists I knew at the time, David Kaplan and Andrew Marshall. And it covers what I'm going to say is probably the most important story I've ever had anything to do with. I was there and I covered it, and I ended up interviewing some of the principals. My interview with one of their members is credited with them being hunted down and killed. It was a pretty wild time. For those of you who don't know about it, during what is best described as the tail end of the New Age movement of the 1980s and early 1990s, when people were into all sorts of alternative belief systems, there were many new religions popping up in the West, especially Japan, which is considered a Western country. People have a lot of disposable income, they start seeking enlightenment, and it sometimes ends up in some pretty weird places. The Aum Shinrikyo was described as a Buddhist sect, although they were into all sorts of bizarre beliefs that really resulted from taking a lot of drugs and just basically being on the outside of a society which did not recognize outsiders. The group was headed up by a man named Shoko Asahara, who came from North Korean ancestry, which was one of the parts of the story which was not talked about at the time. And he basically started predicting the end of the world. You ever notice a lot of these religions always get into the world ending? Except he wanted to accelerate the process. His group was collecting money, a lot of money from their followers. And mostly what was discussed at the time and still now is what was basically the priesthood, his version of the College of Cardinals. There were thousands and thousands and thousands of followers throughout the country, all who went to ground when this happened. This is a guy that got into technology of weaponry. They were able to get a Russian helicopter. They were looking for nuclear material. It's one of the more bizarre stories that you really couldn't make up. And the fact that it was going on underneath the noses of authorities was just beyond all of our expectations, those of us who were following it. I was with a news agency at the time, but I was also writing for a local newspaper, and I was part of their investigation team. And we found out some fascinating things. Now, this book came out very quickly. I wouldn't say too quickly, but it put all of the pieces together, the major ones, the connection this group had with the Russian mafia. It was a major international crime scheme that was covered up under the blanket of religion, religious freedom. Religious freedom, like all freedoms, can be abused, and boy, was this one ever. They were into some of the most bizarre stuff you can imagine, including the local mob hiring them to dispose of bodies using microwave cremation machines. I mean, it's a real nightmare of a story. That morning, I had gotten a call from someone saying, "Turn on your TV, something bad has happened." And it turns out that my secretary at the time, she was actually in one of the trains just behind one that got hit with gas, and that shook her something awful. Later on that day, I would go down and see them removing the bodies from the subway centers. It was a pretty wild time. And I'm going to just mention that I am currently working on coming out with my view of the story, because there's a lot of stuff that was put out that still needs clarification. The book is a good one, except it's long out of print. You'd have to find a used copy of it. When I went up to Amazon and the usual places to look for it, they do have used copies. They're like $30 or $40 each. There have been several other books that have come out about this event. I have not read them, so I didn't want to review them. This one, I was at the book party in Tokyo when it came out in '96. And the journalists who did it did a very good job given how much time they had to work on it. They were the first ones out with a book on it, so it's the one that is the base if you want to study this phenomena. And they went on to have very, very accomplished careers. Mr. Marshall, I believe, even won a Pulitzer. That's quite impressive. Now, why is this book important to read? Well, it shows how some of the nastiest stuff, nastiest terrorism, and that's what this was, can occur even in a place where it's effectively a police state. Now, Japan has often been called the benevolent police state. There are little police boxes known as kobans on the corner of every neighborhood there, and the police officer knows everybody, knows where they work, knows who they're related to. People that move into the neighborhood fill out a card, and you go down to the local police box, and a smiling police officer will take your file and put it in with the rest. It's a benevolent police state, but it's still a police state, which means they're supposed to know everything going on. What did come out after was the fact that these people had political connections, they had international connections with mafia and the Russians, and all sorts of crazy things going on around the world. They were actually down in Australia looking for uranium and testing poison gas out in what they call sheep stations. This was an example of a terrorist organization that was killing people, and I always suspected they killed far more people privately than is generally known, although we never could prove that. You can have some of the nastiest things happen in the name of religion. Does that sound familiar? People's belief systems in the divine, that should be something protected. But this is a case where a first world developed country had a horrifying, crazy bunch of nutcases who went out and, under the protection of freedom of religion, were able to build a terrorist organization which threatened millions of people. There's no other way to say it. So think of what's going on in the United States right now. You have all sorts of interesting religious sects. Think of what's going on in the Middle East. Think of all the different types of people that have poured into the United States right now. Think of all the crazy stuff we're hearing about with Jeffrey Epstein, or with all the other children that are missing, and all the other stories we're hearing. There's a lot of evil that can be committed and has been committed in the name of religion. And religion can be used as a shield to defend some pretty heinous stuff. This is a good book to start. It's sad that it's not in print anymore, and it's not even available electronically. You'd imagine it would be. Well, the publishing business doesn't always go that way, and I do have my own copy, fortunately. Again, the book is The Cult at the End of the World by David Kaplan and Andrew Marshall. It came out in 1996 by Crown Publishing. It was put out in paperback, which is very hard to find for some reason, and there's a lot of hardcover that is out there. It is worth getting. Even after 30 years, we're still dealing with the same nonsense, which is evil and death and terrorism being perpetrated in the name of religion. Something that I imagine all of us who are sane want to see put to an end. That's it for today. If you appreciate my work, please like, subscribe, and share. Share with your friends, and be sure to share with your enemies. They might become friends. I can be reached at feedback@aureliancolumn.com. That's feedback@aureliancolumn.com. I'm up on X. My handle there is MICCAMPEN. That's MICCAMPEN. I'm also up on MeWe, Gab, Telegram, a few other places. I'm not on Facebook. Don't have any intention of ever going back to that place. This podcast originates at Substack. My address there is aureliancolumn.substack.com. Until we meet again, be good, be safe, be vigilant, and remember, keep reading and never judge a book by its movie. Good day